on the other one, you bastard!
Brought to you by Robotoyz. More information in a moment.
At the time of recording, it is apparently 2 days before Kingdom Commander Class Rodimus Prime will be officially announced. At least that's what the leaked photo says, but we can't really be sure. But if that's the case, we'll probably have official photos by the time this video goes up, and I don't really know what they're gonna look like. Will the figure look better than Jetfire? Maybe. Will it be better than Skylinks? Probably not. Will the fandom complain about it for months and months and claim it's a retool when it really isn't? Do you even need to ask? However, it's got me thinking, what is the best Hot Rod / Rodimus Prime
Wait,
toy?
what the f***? You're not seriously putting the two in the same category, are you?
Basically the same design, don't kid yourself.
Jesus Christ, you're a moron!
There have been many attempts over the years, but at this point I think we can discard all of the mainline attempts for obvious reasons. Yes, if you're only counting official figures that appeared at general retail, SS86 wins by default, but despite being very well engineered, he just kind of feels boring.
Okay, now I'm convinced you're psychotic.
I'm convinced you're not the one with the YouTube channel, so why don't you shut the f*** up? Apparently the first Masterpiece version is trash and the second one is average, and I hear Fans Toys Hoodlum is on the better end of their engineering standards. The Papa Toys one can basically f*** off because it's an unfinished stolen prototype of the Mech Fans Toys version, and it is quite terrible from what I hear. One of the few Legends figures I refuse to get because it's just that bad. But said Mech Fans Toys version turned out quite well, especially in its versatility. It's why it got an honorable mention on the top of 2020 list. But no, I don't think any of these take the crown. There is one figure that absolutely demolishes the competition. Greetings Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to DX9 D-06 Carry, also known as Rodimus Prime. Unlike his red and blue predecessor, Hot Rod and Rodimus Prime share a pretty similar robot mode design pre- and post-upgrade. The only main difference is the somewhat different leg detailing and potentially different head depending on who's in charge of the design at any given time. The primary difference lies in the vehicle mode, going from sports car to Winnebago. And yes, I know the concept from the G1 movie is incredibly f***ing stupid even for the time, but it's a staple of the franchise, so these days we just kinda have to roll with it. Thing is, it's actually quite difficult to get the design to work properly. You really have to nail the proportions, otherwise it ends up looking dinky. Actually, it's something I'll give the Power of the Primes version credit for. They made sure to get such a thing right. So the question is, how well did DX9 pull this alternate mode off? All things considered, pretty damn peachy. I wouldn't say the proportions are better than the previously mentioned Power of the Primes version, but considering this is an entirely integrated robot that doesn't rely on a detachable trailer, this turned out really well. The first thing you're going to notice is the clean and concise color layouts, both in plastic choices and paint job. Despite being incredibly durable, the plastic incorporates a pristine matte finish that really sells you on the masterpiece aspect, despite fitting into a vastly different aesthetic. Sure, you do get this somewhat out of place crimson on the top that looks slightly cheaper than the rest, but unless you're really keeping an eye out, it's wholly unnoticeable. The front has ended up going for a completely different aesthetic to what we're used to, rounding out the edges and corners into something almost akin to a bullet train. It would have been so easy to get this wrong, but it's a surprisingly well-handled addition. I reckon the window shape is the key factor that brings the whole front together, as had they gone with a more traditionally flat one, things may have looked mismatched. Also gotta say kudos to the designers for not making this whole thing a faux part. Yes, unfortunately this means the Autobot symbol placement on the chest may be a smidge difficult, but for the most part this front section becomes the chest, and I dig that. It's a nice touch considering by design the rest of the vehicle has to rely on shell forming. Unfortunately, looking at it from directly ahead reveals that this Rodimus is quite the wide boy. This is a little disappointing, but much like many of this vehicle's faults, it's understandable given what the transformation has to do. It does make the smokestacks a little weird though, but hey, at least said smokestacks are done in this magnificent chrome. Also hasn't shipped a single bin in the years I've owned it. They're durable as Taking it further back, man, these flames are done well. Instead of using just plain old tampograph or worse, stickers, they've opted to sculpt the whole thing into it. It has an extra level of spice to the design, and damn, even the color match is seamless. In fact, overall, the mechanical details on the side are probably my favorite part of the alt mode, especially these trapezoid, whatever you want to call them. Don't know what they are, but they look cool. I have seen some people complain about the hollowness on the wheel arches, but come on, man, that's nitpicking. It's fine, especially with the addition of rubber tires. Once again, just like the pipes, no damage over the years, still durable as f***. On the whole, this is a vehicle mode that gets a lot of things right. The sculpting and the paint are incredibly refined, and considering the three most difficult colors to paint happen to be red, yellow, and orange, the fact that they look so pristine on this figure is pretty f***ing sweet. Ultimately, there's not a lot of issues I can find here. If I really had to nitpick, the back section seems a smidge underdone. The gunmetal paint is applied pretty thinly and blends in way too easily into the red. The knee sections are also pretty bland, and could have used some yellow paint to put some headlights here. Might go in with a Gundam marker eventually, but even then it's the same old thing as your average back kibble. You're not going to display your robots like this, so why would you display your vehicles like that either? If you're going to display this figure in this mode, it's a lovely piece. It might not have the presence of the power of the Prime's version, but it gets the job done, especially considering the sacrifices made. And as a play-based figure, you'll have a lot of fun rolling it around. And yes, I would have loved to have some silver on the wheels, but other than that and what I've mentioned before, there's not a lot wrong here. It's a masterfully crafted vehicle, yet it never feels full of itself as some third-party Masterpiece figures do. On the topic though, Masterpiece fans who actually care about the size of their fictional space road vehicles might be disappointed. Thanks to this being an all-inclusive robot, scale has pretty much been thrown out the window. He'll work pretty well with your chugbots, but MPs, no chance in hell. Do I personally care though? Not really, and it's clear the designers didn't either. The feeling I get from this is steeped in fun factor, which is a very nice change of pace compared to a lot of what third-party Masterpiece is doing these days, with super serious sculpts and seriously lacking detail. It's why you don't often see Masterpiece reviews on this channel. To me, it's just become boring. However, Carrie sidesteps that and delivers a truly memorable alt mode, even if there's not technically anything we haven't seen done before, aside from maybe the rounded front. That's not the most memorable part for this design though, for you're about to see a transformation that defies all logic. But before we get to that, I'd like to take a minute to talk about today's sponsor, Robotoyz. Robotoyz is one of the leading Aussie Transformers retailers, ranking 3rd on the recent Ozformers polls for best Transformer seller in the country. And keep in mind, that was going up against heavy hitters such as Amazon. So it's clear that they're trusted by the community. For all your mainline figures, selects figures, Masterpiece figures, knockoff figures, the whole kit and caboodle, Robotoyz has you covered. And don't forget, if you haven't already, use the code DrLock 10% off at the checkout to get 10% off a single order. Unfortunately, it has been a long time since I received this figure from them, so it's currently sold out. But there are still plenty of options from the parent company to choose from. I'd recommend going for DX9's sister company, New Age. Probably the best third-party Legends company in the business, and absolutely worth every penny. Anyways, there'll be a link in the description, and I hope you check them out. So, on to the transformation. The term shell former is often met with disdain, particularly with some recent examples from the Studio Series line being incredibly lazy. And yes, typically that type of transformation scheme is used by designers when they can't think of anything better to do. It is, in most instances, a cop-out. But there are plenty of exceptions, and I think this might be the greatest exception of them all. First thing you want to do is untab this and bring it up, and also bring out this section separate from there so that these two can transform better later on. I don't like this section because when you're going back it makes a really annoying clicking noise, and it really doesn't sound good. Especially with the somewhat cheaper plastic there, and not really liking it. But that's the only part of the transformation I don't like. Take the smokestacks and fold them up so that you've got enough clearance. Come to the back here and untab this whole section from there, but we're not going to move it out just yet because we don't have enough clearance at the moment. We will pretty soon though. Come to the back here and fold this tab up, and now everything will start coming apart. What you want to do is bring these sections out, which will allow us to start transforming everything else properly. They're also tabbed into there, so you want to make sure those are undone. Take this front bit and bring it up so that we can start working on the arms. You'll notice that we've got double hinges here. These two separate and fold down with the double hinges so that we can get the torso into place. Although you might want to give yourself just a little bit of room first. Now we can actually start bringing the wings into place. First thing, you bring these up a bit, fold these sections back down into place. You've got double hinges that collapse in properly, as well as a double hinge on that allows that to collapse properly. Doesn't tab into place, but it does hold in pretty securely. Collapse those into there and collapse that into there. Nice, clean as shit backpack that does fold over to become a wonderful spoiler. You'll notice the backpack is on a swivel that rotates around 180 degrees. You want to get these leg parts out of the way just for now so that we can collapse everything. You've got this nice double hinge here that collapses into the torso itself. Then you've got 2 pegs here and 2 slots on each side, and the whole thing pegs together like so, whilst keeping the double hinges down. And it's a bit difficult, but once it's in there, it's sturdy as and then you can bring the chest into place over that whole thing. This back panel doesn't really go anywhere, so I just like to tuck it under there like that. And then we've got the legs, which are actually quite similar to Time Return Cup, although at the time this was wholly original. Maybe this served as the inspiration for that. This isn't the only time that Hasbro's taken inspiration from third parties. Rotate this bit all together and then clip it into there. Rotate around 180 degrees. Make sure that's fully lined up and it clicks into place there, making a lovely leg. And then you bring out the heel spur. Now, funny thing, this is actually supposed to clip in and then fold in on each other, but you don't really need to do that. You can just keep it like that. And I would recommend keeping it like that because if it is all tucked in there, it becomes very difficult to get out. You end up needing a tool, and the funny thing is it's not entirely required. There's plenty of clearance in the vehicle mode, so there's no real issue. Do you know why it ended up like that? It seems like one of those things that they just added because they thought the tolerances would look good in the end, but in the end they ended up not doing that. Last but not least, we do the arms. This part rotates around and rotates around. Untab that section from there by pulling it out, rotate it down, and then collapse it into place. And then last but not least, collapse that bit into there. And there we have this magnificent Rodimus Prime in his robot mode, and that is barely a shell former. I mean, it is a shell former by design, but it does so much clever anyway. The pipes and most of the arms are real, the shoulders are real, the chest is real, the legs, even though they aren't real, they fold in an incredible way. It is a masterclass in shell former engineering, and if this is what shell formers were like most of the time, no one would complain. Ultimately, the decision to make certain bits, the actual bits of the car, makes this feel like an incredibly complete and robust toy. So that's why I consider this to be the best shell former ever produced. I haven't come across one that's better than this. Some might have better backpacks, but I dare you to find a shell former with a more satisfying transformation. Often, Hot Rod and Rodimus robot modes tend to blend together due to the baggage held from the Generation 1 design. Fortunately, that's completely avoided here thanks to the influence. This Rodimus Prime is based on the Studio Ox design, which is actually quite a common source for third-party designs to take from. Question is, what actually is Studio Ox? If you're like me, you've probably heard like a billion reviews cite it as an inspiration for a certain figure, but no one ever seems to truly elaborate. Well, after a quick trip to TF Wiki, I'm happy to report that Studio Ox was a freelance art studio that provided artwork for several Japanese magazines. Apparently, after its dismantling in 2003, only Transformers fans typically tend to remember it, so I propose a toast to our fallen Japanese comrades. It's iced tea this time. Now, the choice for DX9 to go with the Studio Ox design wasn't one that was all that consistent. They've gone with that source a few times, but other releases have also drawn from other inspirations. This specific choice, however, works wonders for the design because holy fuck, this thing looks amazing. When I cite this as the best Rodimus Prime on the market, this is the reason why. For starters, he actually gives off a primely feel, unlike many of his competitors. Well, maybe the Kingdom one will as well, but at the time of writing, full photos aren't out yet. Maybe I'll be able to comment on that by the time this video goes up, but we'll see. The head sculpt is stern with a chiseled face and an incredibly pronounced chin. However, it fits the aesthetic perfectly, as opposed to looking like an animated head on a third-party masterpiece body. It's actually a substantial deviation from the original artwork, which in this case I'm all for, as the original kinda looks like he was wearing a snake-themed turban.
What a slithery little snake.
It would have been nice to have some yellow on the crest, and maybe even a more vibrant color for the eyes, or maybe even clear blue light piping, but overall it's remarkably well sculpted and painted. The same feeling applies to the chest. I could ask for them to paint the yellow and red on the top a little more cleanly, but it's still a lovely looking torso. I'm surprised by how well proportioned it turned out, especially given that it's the proper front of the car as opposed to a faux part. The piercing transparent blue on the midriff adds that extra level of complexity needed to bring this whole package to life, and I love how you get little details such as the pistons on the side and the hint of a matrix near the collarbone. It does have a proper matrix though, well, at least a matrix chamber. It's non-removable, but it's a very nice touch. I also adore how pronounced the wheels are on the shoulders, being displayed front and center, proud and true. The figure never feels like it needs to shy away from its vehicle origins. It's a space Winnebago and it knows it. Also blown away by how well the smokestacks integrate into the arms. The tooling is done in such a way so that they never stop, but rather curve into the backs of the arms. Most of this isn't faux either, which is insane. It's so clever. Bit disappointing that the black paint doesn't go all the way inside though, but if that's one of the budget sacrifices they had to make, it's so minor. And damn, the legs are done insanely well, pretty much folding inside out to tuck away the last leftover vehicle bits. As mentioned in the transformation, it's not something that's incredibly uncommon these days, but for the time it was revolutionary. It's the true aha moments that every masterpiece figure should have, but sadly in this age of obsessive toon accuracy, you just don't get it. Really, I can't think of any extremely detrimental flaws with the design here. Everything is pretty much either nitpicks or complaints other people have had that I don't agree with. Case in point, some fans have taken issue with the backpack, but like, this is the cleanest shell former backpack I've ever seen. Have you seen what some of the other examples are like? You're really gonna complain about this? And in terms of things I do take issue with, the legs do look a smidge segmented on the sides thanks to the casting of red plastic near the knee. But again, it really isn't that big of a deal. Such a choice was done to make the vehicle mode look better, and these days they might have done some paint correction to rectify it, but this is a figure from 2015. The fact it holds up so well today is astounding, and the little caveats like this and the fact that the chest flames looked better on the prototype do nothing to prevent his awesomeness from shining through. He's an absolutely fantastic figure in every single category. The build quality is spectacular, the paint is applied nice and thickly yet remains durable, occasional messiness aside. The deco layout is stunning, the cable integration is masterful. There's not much on a base level I could ask for. Even the articulation is effortless. Putting aside the fact that it's surprisingly well articulated for a 2015 figure, every joint is perfectly toleranced. It doesn't even feel like a masterpiece figure. It feels like a Unicron Trilogy one, where the solidity of the joints is first on the list. Every ratchet feels smooth as butter, yet perfectly weighted so nothing droops. The difference is he's got modern levels of articulation, so moments like these are plonked across the whole damn thing. And my word, he stands insanely well thanks to the extra hinges on the feet and the addition of die-cast metal in the toes. Just be careful with those pieces though. This is the one part of the figure that does get plagued with paint chipping. And finally, he does come with one extra accessory, Firedrive. who looks nothing like Firedrive. People surprisingly got really angry with this fella back in the day, and I just don't get it. Yeah, he's definitely not accurate, but the bot mode ain't bad. The head sculpt is adequate and gives you that light piping that you've probably been missing from the main figure. There sadly isn't much paint overall, but that's in service of the gun mode, so it's fine. The silver paint you do get is done really well, especially considering it has to rub up against the black plastic. Nothing here has chipped over the years, and the tolerances remain pretty nice. Articulation is pretty decent, although it's not really a small figure, so you'd expect such. As a Robo Buddy, it's pretty good. As a Transformer though, there had to be a better way to incorporate the parts. The barrel? Sure, whatever, it's weapon parts forming, who cares? The wings though, that kind of parts forming isn't okay in my book, and it's the only flaw with this package that actively frustrates me. But I'ma stop there because I don't want to go on another cliff jumper tangent. Apparently people hate that. Now I've seen a lot of hate for this gun mode, robot accuracy aside, but honestly, it's fine. I get that compared to the actual bot itself, it's pretty underwhelming, but I wouldn't want them putting so much effort into this that the bot itself loses some of its engineering prowess. We wouldn't want a repeat of Thrilling 13 Scoop now, would we? Remember, good robot, bad weapons. Better than bad robot, good weapons. I think that if Rodimus himself wasn't so fantastic, people wouldn't be complaining as much about Firedrive. But that in itself is why this set is so remembered. Because they went all out with Carrie. So ultimately, I can't get too angry. They probably should have rethought the holding options though. You've got a 5mm peg but traditional Masterpiece styled hands. That's not gonna fly. Also, the back leg really needed some extra tooling because it's always getting in the way. Ah well, it's an accessory. How angry are you going to get? If you're so pissed, just take a trip to Shapeways. Problem solved. Anyway, enough of that Who cares about some random Legends figure? Well, I do, but this one's pretty forgettable to the point where I actually forgot to write it into the script and I had to add this whole paragraph in at the end. Yeah, it happens. So you may be asking yourself, how will he fit into my collection? Well, the good news is he's a somewhat nebulous release. By design, the MP scaling works incredibly well with Masterpiece collections, but coincidentally, if you're in the market for a leader-sized Roddy, he fits the bill too. It's kind of like the first Bumblebee fitting into multiple lines, and don't tell me he doesn't, he totally does. In the end, this is an incredibly well done figure. It's elegant and refined, yet you can tell the designers wanted this to be as fun as the original design itself. Yes, there are minor blips here and there, and there are plenty of things this figure could have done. However, I'm not in the business of passing judgment on a figure based on what it could have done. Well, unless it feels lackluster out of the box. Carrie definitely doesn't feel lackluster in any aspect. He's a fantastic piece of third-party history. Honestly, it surprises me how old he is because he still feels modern, even with the leaps and bounds we've made in engineering since. He's got all the best qualities of classic third-party, despite not being from that era, yet still takes hold of your heart even to this day. I don't know about you, but to me, that is the mark of a quality figure. The reason I consider Carrie to be the best Rodimus Prime on the market isn't just because he's the one who embodies the character the most, it's also because he has the least compromises. Now keep in mind, I'm not the kind of guy who typically has a definitive version of any given character. I'm the kind of guy who likes to own multiples of any given character. But you take a look at every previously released Hot Rod and Rodimus, at least out of the ones I own anyway. With the exception of maybe the Mech Fans Toys version, they all share one thing in common, a general lack of care. This is the first Rodimus Prime figure that I came across in my collecting journey where the designers actually gave a shit, and because of that he will always hold a special place in my heart. And as such, I really want this figure to be better recognized within the fandom. I mean sure, third-party aficionados continue to tout its glory, but I feel it deserves to reach a much wider audience. In fact, as I'm producing this video, apparently a reissue is imminent, so the opportunity is right there for the taking. Full disclosure though, today's sponsor will not be carrying it. Carrying. An unintentional pun, f*** me. So to you, I say this. If you've got a couple of hundred to spare, and you've been burned by previous examples of this character, well, this might just be the Roddy for you. And even if the Kingdom version ends up being the best thing since sliced light piping, he's still 100% worth the purchase.